How many of you have had that person sitting in front of you or you're talking to, and you know they're lying to you, you just don't know where they're lying to you? Yeah. You know it's baloney, you just don't know where it's baloney. That's what forensic statement analysis is all about. Get them to write it down or record the conversation you're having with them, and you go back and apply these techniques to it, and you'll find out exactly where they're lying to you and be able to drill down through that. So what is statement analysis? It's typically the analysis of a handwritten statement from your victim or suspect. A lot of our victims end up being our suspects. The technical word is linguistic cues that they'll do when they're writing their statement. What I like to call them is brain leaks. I'm a KISS principle person, so I call them brain leaks. When somebody's writing, their brain, the lies in their brain that they're trying to tell you will leak down through their ink pen, and as they're writing their statement, they're going to leak onto that statement. And applying the principles of statement analysis will show you those brain leaks, or those linguistic cues. And what those reveal is tons of information that they're not telling you, or where they're just outright lying to you and how they do that. The best way to do it is the old-fashioned legal pad and ink pen. You don't want to use a word processor, let them email it to you, because they can edit without you knowing where they edit. If they're writing it down, when they edit, you see where they edit because they have to scratch it out, and then you can explore why they scratched that out. So let's dive into it a little bit. After all, our public is sometimes not the brightest arrow in the quill. Here's an example. Clipped out of the newspaper. Here's a headline example. I know when I was in homicide, our victims never talked to us. So I would like to have been that rarely case. But
that's good, right?
Yeah, yeah. So statement analysis is an examination of words independent of the case facts. I do consulting with a lot of law enforcement agencies where they'll send me their statements and I'll do the analysis for them. And I don't need to know the case facts. When they'll call me and say, can we send you this statement? Here's the case. Well, I don't need to know about the case, because I don't want to have any predisposed ideas of what I'm going to find when I do the statement. Now when I get done with it, I'm curious, and I'll email them back my results and say, now tell me the rest of the story. But you don't need to know the details of the case initially to be able to do the analysis. You get the statement, you apply the techniques. There's 10 different techniques. You layer one upon another on the statement, and it shows you exactly, when you have that interview, where you want to drill down. And this is best used up front in the beginning of the investigation before you have any initial interviews. Let them write it down, or let them record it on a digital recorder and then have it transcribed. Do your analysis, and then when you have that face-to-face with them, you'll already have a pre-set of questions that analysis gave you on where specifically you want to ask questions about that story and where to attack, because you'll already know instead of doing it after the fact. Words, we use words to convey meaning. If they're honest words, we're telling a story. When you're interviewing somebody, they're telling you a story of an event that's already happened to them. So that's coming from memory. It'll be past tense as they tell it. The details will be consistent, and there will be more details because they're telling you a story from memory. Keeping in mind that everybody edits. Bill, if you wouldn't mind, tell me everything you did from the time you got up this morning until the time you got here.
Yeah, it'd be about a tenth of it. I could recall about a tenth of it.
Okay, you could recall a tenth of it. But typically when you recall that story, or you gave me the story back, you would leave out personal details of your restroom activity and getting dressed and like that. You would, I got up, I got dressed, had breakfast, I came here. Leaving out a lot of details. You edit those out, one, because you don't think I need to know, I really don't want to know some of them, and other details you edit out because you don't want me to know. So as our writers write, they will leave out details, sometimes because they don't feel they're important, other times because they don't want us to know, and they'll substitute words in those places. But as long as the story is consistent, full of detail, and in past tense, generally it's going to be true. When people try to be deceptive, they create the details, they will slip to present tense when they tell a story, the details will be inconsistent, and there won't be a lot of detail. So when you start pinning them down on it, they don't have a lot of details because they're making it up as they go. Hence is why they slip into present tense as they tell you the story, because they're making it up as they go. So as I analyze a statement, if I see somebody go from past tense to current tense, that's a big flag as to the reality of the statement just changed. The circumstances just changed because we went to current tense from past tense. Statement analysis is another tool in your investigative toolbox. I like to call it a key. It's another tool in your investigative toolbox. We all have toolboxes we bring to work of all of our skills. Some of us are better at certain things than others. This is just another skill to bring to the table when you're doing your investigation. Studies have shown that forensic statement analysis is more accurate than a polygraph. For what it's worth, a polygraph is not admissible in court, nor is forensic statement analysis, but both are tools in your toolbox. It's valuable in all aspects of what we do, whether it's law enforcement, arson investigations, fire investigations. A lot of times our victims / suspects, when they call 911, will set up their story in 911. So depending on the case you're working on, if you can get those 911 tapes and transcribe those and apply it to those, you'll see the lies right there. And I'll show you an example as we go through. And through private investigations, insurance, I've had IRS investigators in my classes. Anywhere we're doing an investigation and we're interviewing somebody, forensic statement analysis is handy. Locally, my first year in Coeur d'Alene, this is my third winter here, I was having my tires changed in my car at a tire shop in Coeur d'Alene, and I see this newspaper laying on the table where I think it's a 7,000 square foot mansion, 11,000 square foot mansion and burned down on the river. So I pick it up and I'm reading it, and just reading the article, something's not quite right with this fire. I know the police chief, and I give him a call and say, I'm not sure if any of your detectives have this skill set or not, and if they don't, you know, I'd like to help, but if you have statements, they could be analyzed and give you a lot of clues. If I'm sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, feel free to tell me, you're not going to offend me, I'm just putting it out there. A couple of weeks later, the captain of the division called me, said, here's a statement we got from the husband and wife that own the house. Ends up, I feel very strongly that the husband either burnt the house down or one of his kids did, and he knows. He put them up to it. She was clueless as to how it started, but I feel very strongly he did. But by the time I got included in it, they'd already lawyered up, and insurance was getting ready to pay off on the house because they couldn't prove anything. So the exercise and the statements then was just for our know-how. Was it going to play out? Here's an example. Rape statement. Suspect says she accused me of raping her, and then she said that I called and threatened her to take care of her if she called the police. I didn't call her. He's not denying that he didn't rape her. He's not denying he didn't threaten her. He's just saying he didn't call her. If you look between the words. Jeffrey McDonald. How many of you remember Jeffrey McDonald? Captain in the Army. This was in the 80s, I believe. 70s or 80s. Later convicted of killing his family. This is an excerpt out of his statement. So I went back and checked for pulses on my wife and kids. There was no pulse on my wife. Means he had to finish killing the kids. Burglary investigation. Lady reports that her apartment's burglarized. In addition to stealing some belongings, they spray painted obscenities on her wall. The detective working the case asked her boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend now, did you have anything to do with the burglary? He says that he did not burglarize the apartment, and since they broke up on good terms, there was no reason for him to spray obscenities on her wall. Oops. Here is an email that a lady did in reference to an Amber Alert that she forwarded out. I'll let you read it for a couple of seconds and see if there's anything about this email that jumps out at you as you're reading. And when you get it, just shout it out.
South America isn't overseas.
Okay?
And there's Canada.
Okay? Anybody else?
How does she know it's still not too late?
How does she know it's not too late? Okay. This child. It's a mother writing about her daughter. This child is a psychological break of that connection. She's going to be referring to her child as my baby, my daughter, my little girl. This child is a distancing statement in that relationship. So by her referring to her daughter as this child is a flag to me that she knows more about what's going on and that she may be deceased because she's broken that psychological tie, parenthood tie. My wife and I, our youngest is 30, and I can tell you he's still mama's baby. So when she uses this child, that's a clue that she knows what's going on and something's already happened to this little girl. Condit Chung, anybody remember the Condit? He's a representative of California. Connie Chung interviews him. This was shortly after the Bill Clinton escapades. Condit's aide, female aide, disappears, and he's immediately a suspect as to her disappearance. So she's interviewing him and asks, did you say or do anything that would have caused her to drop out of sight? His answer, you know, Chandra and I never had a crossword. Did he answer her question?
No.
No. No. Two reasons, one of two reasons. First, he's a politician, and do they ever answer a question? No. And two, it makes him more of a suspect because he's not directly answering the question. She's later found, he's later, as far as the investigator is concerned, not tied to her death and not ever part of that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but he was never formally brought into it. O.J. Simpson even did it. This is an excerpt out of the letter he wrote to Kardashian, where he's talking about the murder of Nicole and her friend, and he slips the current tense. Everyone must understand, I have nothing to do, versus had nothing to do. So he goes to current tense, which would be would raise a flag.
And then immediately went back to past tense.
And then back to past tense. Weeping Texas mom convicted of killing her two little boys. Here's where the 911 tapes come in handy.
What's that?
It's probably hard for you to see all the way back here. Initially, she's saying, I did not kill my babies, which would be an appropriate way of rephrasing it. Her two little boys got stabbed to death, and she's referring to them as my babies. That would be a acceptable parental tie. In her 911 call, she says, she cries, someone came in, they broke in, just stabbed me and my children. Put yourself in her place for a second. Somebody breaks into your house and attacks you and your kids. When you pick up the 911 call, what is your statement going to be? Send help, somebody's hurt my babies. Her 911 call starts with the alibi. Someone came in, someone broke in. Did they come in or did they break in? Which one is it? And stabbed me and my babies. We also refer to people in the order that they are important to us. She puts herself in front of her kids. Someone came in, they broke in, they stabbed me and my children. So she put herself in front of her children, and she uses my children instead of my babies. Using my children is that psychological break in the relationship. It's a distancing break in the relationship. As human beings, we have a hard time hurting something we care about. So we have to break that tie to do it. So when she goes to my children, she's breaking that tie because she stabbed her kids. It also would apply to our possessions. If I'm in love with my car and I'm going to burn my car for insurance, it's going to turn into the car, not my car. I have to break that psychological tie, and we do that unconsciously. She's later arrested. In her statement down here, I love those children more than my life. Those children. Huge psychological break in the bond of mother and child.
Well, and she's also speaking in past tense, and even though they had already passed, a mother still talks in present.
Very good point, thank you. Mothers especially have a very hard time talking about their kids in the past tense if they're deceased, even if they died legitimately, you know, in a car wreck or cancer or something like that. They have a hard time letting go and breaking that to talk about them in past tense terms. So for her to immediately do that, or any victim to go to past tense on a kidnapping, is a huge indicator that they know what's going on. If they know that they're deceased. And once again, I did not stab those children, nor did I try to stab myself. That part's true. She did try to stab herself. Hers was just superficial cuts. She stabbed the boy. But this is where the 911 tapes, pull the 911 tapes. She set up her alibi in the 911 tapes. Susan Smith, South Carolina, 1994. She's eventually convicted of killing her 2 little boys. She strapped them into their car seats in the vehicle and pushed it into the lake and let them drown strapped in their car seats. This is where, if you have a victim talking to the press, where that comes in real handy. In her statements to the press, I just feel hopeless. I can't do enough. My children wanted me. They needed me. And I can't help them now. She's reporting that they were kidnapped. She's talking to the press, tons of sympathy, all the news stations are having her on. What's wrong with these statements here?
Okay.
They needed me, she's gone.
Past tense, the kids needed her.
All past tense. She's referring to her kids in the past tense. Huge indicator that she's lying. Because, as you said, mothers have a very difficult time doing that even if they die legitimately, let alone saying that they're kidnapped. If they are truly legitimately kidnapped, she would be talking about them in the current tense, not the past tense. She appears on CBS this morning. I did not have anything to do with the abduction of my children. Your mama loves you so much, you guys got to be strong. I just feel in my heart you're okay. Abduction. Very soft term for her to be using for her kids to be stolen from her. My kids were stolen, my kids were kidnapped. Abduction's a very soft way to say that. And once again, breaking that psychological tie, my children versus my little boys, my babies. This is a homicide, an excerpt out of a homicide statement. 7 times prior to this part of the statement, he refers to his wife. My wife, my wife, my wife. 7 times, my wife. He never introduces Louise as his wife, he just says, my wife. 7 times prior to this point. When he gets to the point where his wife is harmed, he uses her first name. He's never introduced Louise as his wife. We know it's his wife because she's dead in the relationship, but he never said, Louise, my wife. He just kept saying, my wife, my wife, my wife, until she's harmed, and then it's Louise. He's breaking the psychological tie. My wife is a relationship term. Louise, using a first name, breaks that relationship. Guys, when your wives are mad at you and are calling you by your first name, she's breaking that relationship. My wife is a relationship term, going to her first name, because he has a hard time saying that he shot her in the face. There's other things here about the gun acting on its own and things like that that you would look at, but the point is breaking that tie. So let's work through one together. One of the things we look for is lack of conviction. Somebody writing us a statement and not having conviction in what they're saying. And this is one of the examples I think you have in your packet. And also editing words or editing phrases. So we can pencil our way through this one together, and I'll,
So it kind of looks like this, and it's underneath, you know, a little section of his bio summary.
I think it's exercise 3
Exercise 15, and the next one's lack of conviction.
so it's probably the second one.
Yeah.
It starts with I worked at my office all day.
Yeah, it's entitled Lack of Conviction, the last page.
This is from an arson investigation. And the easiest way to do this, if this was a class, if we were doing this all day long, I would have given you all highlighters, and you use highlighters, it makes things a lot easier. So what we first want to look for is lack of conviction in his statement to us. I worked at my office, City Hall, on and off all day. So on and off is lack of conviction. Now when you're having a conversation with somebody, we can use lack of conviction and talk in generalities about how we use time and places. So one indicator is not a sign of deception. When the indicators start stacking up on one another, that's when you start wondering why. I went to Dursis to eat supper at the campus kitchen at around 6 or 7. Well, I picked Bill up this morning at around 8. So that's not necessarily a big deal, but it's still a lack of conviction. I think I came home after that. I may have went to City Hall later, I'm not sure. So there's, but if I did, it will be on the police log. Okay, he's the mayor of a small town. So by adding that little part in there, he's putting in his intimidation of I'm the mayor, you're investigating my house fire. He's exercising a little control in the statement. I remember watching TV AETN. He has a hard time recounting what he did all day and how much he worked, but he knows what he watched when he got home from work. AETN. So now the memory's coming back. Later, then the news, the last thing I remember was watching David Letterman. So after, I'm not sure, and later are both editing words. If you camped out on those for a minute, you would see that there's probably a paragraph or two of information under that word letter. Later. I went to City Hall later. Later after what? What did you do before you went to City Hall? What is that later? What is that one word taking the place of? I watched TV AETN later than the news. Okay, from the time you watched AETN till the news, later is substituted for another group of information. What happened from AETN to the news? What did you do from here to here? He's substituting one word for what could be a paragraph of information. He's either intentionally leaving out, because he doesn't want you to know what he was doing, or he doesn't think it's important. Probably the first. Second part of the statement, I was real tired. I cut the TV off at around 12 or 12:30. Around 12 or 12:30, I went to bed last night at around 9:30. That's not a big deal, but it's still another lack of conviction, and we want to point out all of them. I'm not sure. I cut the lights off, sit in the hallway maybe 15 minutes. Show of hands, how many of you turn your lights off before you go to bed and sit in the hallway? I'm the only one? My wife's been telling me I was weird. I got up, went to my bedroom, closed the door, and laid down. Next thing I remember, something woke me up. I'm not sure what it was. I think it was the smoke alarm. Okay, when I cook, the smoke alarm tells me dinner's done. And it still scares the fire out of me. So if I'm in bed and the smoke alarm goes off, what's that do to your heart rate? He doesn't have a whole lot of excitement here in his statement to correlate with what he's telling you, right? That's another thing you look for, is the requisite emotion of the story you're being told. He's casually, you know, I'm not sure what really happened. I think the smoke alarm went off. Those things are scary when you're awake. They make you jump. How does it not scare the wits out of you when he's supposed to be asleep? That he's not sure what it was. I'm not sure of the rest, but I could not see real good. Could not get my breath very good. I went to the window, and after that, I'm not sure. The next thing I remember is talking to people. So after is another editing word he's put in there, after what? He's got one word in there that's substituting probably a sentence or a paragraph full of information that he could have said, that he's just putting in after. After what? Give me the details that fill in between the and the that. The next thing I remember, people talking to me. So set in the hallway, that's, okay. As you do the statement analysis and you're applying the techniques, you're also asking yourself, why did they say this? Why did they say it here? So that's the set in the hallway is one of those, why were you sitting in the hallway? How many of you close your door when you go to bed? Some people do, some people don't. When our kids were little, we did. Now that we're empty nesters, we don't. So that's not necessarily a big deal other than what is his MO. Do you always close your door when you go to bed? Okay, we know he did this night because when he started the fire in his house, closes his bedroom door, keeps the fire from getting to him before he can be rescued. So the question is, do you always close your door so I know what his MO is? Yes, I always close my door. Okay. No, I did tonight, Brian. I'm not sure why. And then laid down. He didn't say he went to sleep. He sat in the hallway 15 minutes. He was really tired. It was such an exhausting trip from turning off the lights to getting back to the bed, he had to sit down and take a 15-minute break. But when he got to bed, he didn't go to sleep. He laid down. So the rest of the story is, his sitting in the hallway for 15 minutes was making sure the implements that he set up to burn down his house, everything was working correctly. The fire was starting. He could go to bed, he could close the bedroom door to keep the fire out of the bedroom and go lay on the bed till the smoke alarm went off, telling him, okay, now you can jump up and be scared your house is burning down, and play out the rest of the story. Another thing we look for is pronouns, how people use their pronouns and nouns. When I learned these techniques at the FBI Academy in 1999, and when the instructor at the FBI Academy told me we were going to use English grammar in the analysis of statements, that terrified me, because when I was in high school, my favorite part of high school was lunch and going home. I got, as my wife calls them, I got one-legged A's in English grammar in high school, so I'm not very good at that part. But there's cheaters that we use that help us with our pronouns and nouns and the English grammar stuff, so it makes it easier for English grammar challenged people like myself to still do this. So in this one, we're going to look at the pronouns. This case is an assault and a carjacking case. And I already have them circled, which is the technique is to go through and circle all of the pronouns. I'll give you can everybody see this? Okay. I'll give you a minute to read it. And if there's any pronoun use that jumps out at you, let me know what that is.
We.
Bill, said we? I cannot tell you that this is a 100% rule on every statement. I can tell you that this has been a 100% rule for every case I have personally been involved in as a major crimes commander. If we have a victim alleging a crime, and in this case an assault and a carjacking, he made me do this, he made me go here, he made me do this, we went there. Back to that psychological, those breaks and those ties. We is a relationship term. So when a victim uses the word we, there's a relationship and the story is a lie. Because even if the relationship is a husband, if a husband attacks his wife and assaults his wife, when she tells that story, there's not going to be any we's and there's not going to be any my husbands. It's going to be Bill, or it's going to be Jim, or him. There's no relationship words in that because she's been violated. Even if they're husband and wife, there's a violation and those ties are broke. So when you have a victim telling you a story, he made me, he made me, he made me, we went, in my personal experience, when they go to we, 100% of the time, it's a lie. Because they're building a relationship that should not exist. Even if it existed before the attack, it won't be existing during this explanation of the attack. And with counseling and a good preacher and things, there might be a relationship again someday, but there's not ever going to be one when they talk about this story. So when she's alleging she's been carjacked and assaulted, and she uses the word we, I know it's a lie. The rest of the story here is that she picked up her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was trying to get some money out of her and wanted a ride across town. She didn't have any money to give him, so he smacked her around, and she dropped him off, and he went his own way.
Do you find this is the case with victims of all ages, or does it matter if their grammar's not, like if they're a 10-year-old and their grammar's not up to par?
It won't matter. We is a relationship term in the brain, and the brain won't allow that to happen.
Okay, so it doesn't matter regardless of age.
They'll make those, the brain will make those connections and disconnections subconsciously. They will not know.
What about, is that true with the going to past tense and present tense in a child?
Yes, because they'll be, when you ask the child to tell you a story, they'll be telling you the story from memory.
Because you know how when people say, little kids, they say, and then we go to the park and we go to the...
If they consistently tell you the whole story in present tense, then they're just telling you it as they relive it, and it would be truthful. One of the key techniques in this is to look for a norm, and then the break of the norm. And when they break the norm, that's the indicator of deception. So if they start the whole story in current tense as a child, then they're just walking through it as they tell you, and that would be their norm. But if they start one way and go the other and then go back, that's the break, that's the indicator.
So when she says, he asked me if I had money, if he had any money, I told him no. If the truth would be, instead of we, he made me drive for an hour.
Right.
He then made me, he made me.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes. He made me exit here, he made me go to here, he made me do this. He made me drive down this road half a mile. Because she's doing all this under duress, there's no relationship, if it was a true statement. When she slips, and that's why I call them brain leaks, is because as she's writing it down, she's not realizing she's going from the he to the we. She's making that linguistic cue that's coming out is being done subconsciously. She's not realizing they're doing it. That's why you want to get these handwritten or transcribed versus letting them use the computer. Because if you let them do a Word document or send you an email, they might catch that in their, as they edited it before they hit send on the computer. Oh, I don't need to say we. They might figure it out themselves and be able to back up, replace it, and you'll never know they did that.
There's really a good physiological reason why you're saying what you're saying, why it's true. It's because the brain is not a truth machine. The brain is a survivor. And so what the brain says is the brain leak.
Right.
Because it's coming from the brain. It's not coming from thinking. Because if they were thinking, they'd know what you know.
Right. And another very good point on that is when you get your statement from them, you want to give them a wide parameter to write about. And that makes it easier for you to find the norm, so when they break the norm, it's more obvious. With all my interviewees, I slide on the pad and say, tell me everything that happened from the time you got up this morning until the police came, or till the fire truck came, or till you went to bed. And somewhere in that, from the time they got up till the time they went to bed, is the incident I'm looking at. But by making them write about the whole day, I'm going to get their norm. And then during the event, it'll make it a whole lot easier to see if they break that norm during the event.
In a handwritten statement, do you see a change in the handwriting as well?
There probably is, but I'm not a handwriting guy. And even if, what I notice is the more they write, the sloppier it gets because they're getting tired. But as far as loops and swirls and the handwriting analysis part of it, I don't know that part. But I know the more pages I make them write, the farther I get into it, the harder it is to read sometimes because they're getting tired of writing. What I want to get mainly is from the time they got up through the event. After the event, I don't care about, because from the time they got up until the event is gonna give me their norm, and then I can look at the deviation. Sometimes I'll make them till the time they go to bed just to get extra stuff on the paper, but a lot of times I never even look at the after the event stuff. And they'll look at you funny when you're investigating whatever it is, and you know you're investigating it, and you slide them an ink pad and say, write everything from the time you got up that day until the police came. From the time I got up, yeah. Everything from the time I got, because they're wondering what that has to do with whatever happened, they're claiming happened that day.
So, because I do a lot of defense, so I'm usually getting these cases 5, 6, maybe even a couple of years after the incident occurs. Do you find there's a change over time that, so if I were to slide a 10-year-old who is a rape victim a paper and say, write what you did that day, do you think this would be as glaringly obvious?
Yes.
Okay.
They're still gonna establish a norm and how they're gonna communicate with you. And as they go through the event, if they don't break that, there's no indicators of deception.
So that it doesn't change over time, it should stay.
They might lose a few details, depending on how the whole day is imprinted in their brain versus that part of the day.
Right.
But other than that, no. All right, here's another investigation, and I think this is the other one in your packet. No, I'm sorry, I got this one done already. This is another example of pronoun use. I left my house right after breakfast to join my friends. Now, if all of my notes were on here that the computer regenerated, you notice my friends is underlined. Over here in this margin, I'd have my friends. So anytime there's a person referenced, I notate it in the margin, and what that does is build a subsequent interview list for you. So in this investigation, I want to know who his friends are so I can talk to them about the day, and who Stan is, and his cousin, because those are people I may want to interview additionally. I drove back to my house, made a few phone calls, then went out to dinner. You see I have that box there because there should be a pronoun there. Then I went out to dinner. If you see, and he's got another one down here, he dropped the pronoun. Sometimes those mean something, sometimes they don't. You have to look at the context of how he's using it. A lot of times they mean tension by absence. When they're telling a story and they drop the pronoun, it means there's tension in that moment. And subconsciously they'll drop the pronoun as they're telling the story. So you want to explore what the tension was at that moment, why they did that. Dropped me off at my house around 10 after I changed my clothes, left the house. My house, my house, my house, the house. That's why I have it in blue, is he's changed how he's referring to his house. He's just broke the psychological connection. This is an arson investigation. You just broke the connection with your house. Things aren't looking good for you. Around midnight, we heard the fire engines got up, and I got up, we got up, he dropped the pronoun. Tension by absence. Why did you drop the way you would normally speak? To see what was going on. So this is the norm is my, the. He broke the norm of the my to the, huge flag. Robbery example. Okay, this one's in your back. This is the one we're going to do together. The evening started out normally. I have that highlighted because that's extraneous information. It has nothing to do with the question of what happened. The evening started out normally. I closed up after all the customers had left. I worked the late shift last night because I had an appointment during the day. That too really has nothing to do with the event. I counted the money, filled out a deposit slip. I was the last one out, so I set the alarm and locked the doors. Drove to First National Bank. Oh, we lost our pronoun. Not I drove to First National Bank. Drove to First National Bank.
Who drove?
Yeah. There's no pronoun there. Well, that's, to make my deposit. Now, That's not a huge red flag for me, because if I'm a manager of a business and I'm making the deposit, I kind of have ownership in that, and I'm, you know, responsible for it, so it's mine. But it's still a why in my brain to see, are you that committed employee? Is this the ownership? Or is this that brain leak that this is my deposit? It's gonna pay the rent. I usually park right next to the deposit box. Okay, then how come you didn't today? If you usually do, it's extraneous information, but it's still telling. I usually park, but he doesn't explain why he didn't tonight, just that he normally does. Got out of my car and headed to the deposit box. Lost our pronoun again, tension by absence. The tension by absence started from the time he headed to the bank. Now that he's at the bank, what's going on in this moment that there's tension in the telling of this story? Got out of my car, headed to the deposit box. A tall man approaches. Approaches is kind of a soft word for somebody that's robbing you. And also our statement lacks the requisite emotion of somebody getting robbed at the bank at the after hours drop. I think. And also approaches is present tense. He went from past tense to present tense. He comes out of nowhere, present tense, tells me to drop the bag, also present tense. So the part where he's getting robbed of his deposit is all present tense. And now it's the bag and not the deposit or my deposit. Tells me to drop the bag. Before it was my deposit. Is it no longer my deposit because there's no money in the bag and you're dropping the bag? Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I'm very careful about where I park and whether anyone's around. Then why not tonight? You normally park next to the deposit box. You didn't tell me why you didn't. I dropped the bag. So it's back to the bag again. No inferences of money or being a deposit. And froze right where I was. The man grabbed the bag and ran into the shadows. Dun-dun, dun-dun. That's basically what happened. Okay, here's the pad and pen. Let's start over and now tell me everything that happened, not just basically what happened. Because when he ends it with that, he's giving you a clue that there's a whole lot more of this story he's not telling. He just summed it up with this last sentence. That's basically what happened. When we know from his indicators, the dropping of the pronouns from the time he left the store to go to the bank, he gets to the bank, he goes to current tense, my deposit turns into the bag. So what do you think the result is?
I was just looking at that, and that sentence, he comes out of nowhere and tells me, that's kind of an afterthought because he's already described the guy in the sentence before. So it's more of a justification that he's innocent here, you know, he wants to emphasize that the guy had the drop on him and what have you, so.
Right.
Because then he does say later on, he kind of got the drop on him, and, you know, he doesn't park there, you know, whatever. So.
He's re-justifying his...
Yeah, he's doing it unconsciously, I think, because he's already introduced the guy, and now he's saying he came out of nowhere, so.
Right.
He's just justifying that as well.
Right. Very good.
It comes out of nowhere as an oxymoron. It's illogical. It's not really feasible for matter to just appear out of nowhere.
Right.
It came out of somewhere, and since he knew it came out of nowhere, he must know where it is.
The shadows.
Well, yeah, he disappeared to the shadows, but he approaches, but then it came out of nowhere. Which part of the surroundings of the bank is the nowhere part?
What, when this is done, and you drop the hammer, do you, let's say this interview is taking place, the DPA is sitting right there, the whole 9 yards. Do you confront and drop the hammer on these individuals right on the spot and go through this?
I do. I show it to them and tell them exactly. In fact, they're not all this easy, but I have had them this easy. I had a kidnapping, sexual assault. In fact, Bill worked this case, because we both worked at the same sheriff's office. Bill worked this case as a deputy, and when he went to my class, he's like, that's my case, because I used the case as the final in the class. But a lady alleged that she had been kidnapped, raped, and drove all around in her car and forced to smoke crack. The most unpleasant experience she would almost like to forget is how she puts it in her statement. So my detective takes the interview, takes the statement from her, walks in my office and says, will you work your magic on this and let me know what you think? I said, yeah, invite her back next week. Because you want to get your statement, you want to give yourself time to analyze it, and then bring it back another time to do your interview. And your analysis will build your questions. So the following week, he says, she's here, I'm dressed like this, I'm the commander of the division, so I'm dressed like this. I walk into his office, and I start with all the intimidation stuff. I'm the commander of the division, I'm FBI trained, yada, yada, yada. And then I hold her statement out in front of her that now looks like this. It's got my handwriting all over it. It's got 4 different highlighter colors over it. It looks like a rainbow. I hold it out in front of her, and I say, is this your statement? Is this the statement you wrote for the detective? Yes, sir. I said, you see all that marking and all those colors? Yeah. You know what that means? No. It means you're lying. Oh, good. They're not all that easy, but they can be that easy. And the culmination of a case that took what? Just about a whole weekend of work patrol time.
It was a 14-hour shift, one day, 14 hours on that call that day.
So the initial
And the
call
follow-up.
was investigated as true, and 14 hours worth of
Major crimes responded to the hospital. There was a seine done. It was just a crazy